Good morning, good afternoon to our friends in Europe. Welcome to the DataON Virtual Academy series, where we're hoping to talk to our audience and our customers via virtual and digital communication media. This is our third webinar series within the Academy, and today it's a pleasure. I have two industry veterans and experts talking about Azure Stack HCI. But more importantly, I think is really an unbiased view and third-party view of what they believe of this particular solution, especially from the perspective of Intel team and also Brian from StorageReview. So without further ado, I will start the presentation. Feel free to post your question if you have any questions, and we're happy to answer throughout the process. So today I have two guest speakers, Brian Beeler from StorageReview, and also Alexandro from Intel SSD Solution Architects. Both of them will talk about their perspective of the Azure Stack HCI solution across the board. Some housekeeping items. Make sure you meet your speakers throughout the webinar. Feel free to ask Q&A. If you need to reach us, we do have a Twitter hashtags, Brian, Alexandra, and myself, so feel free to tweet us or contact us directly via email. You should have our information respectively. So, I want to start this webinar series constantly understanding the bigger picture of the journey of hybrid cloud, because the hybrid cloud journey encompasses a lot of topics. But those relevant really are what are the journey you will take in terms of your on-premise hybrid and cloud solutions. And each time during this webinar, we'll bring a different perspective of that journey so our customers understand what are the choices they need to make in that journey. And constantly, I want to continue to enhance the concept of the journey of hybrid cloud, especially HCI, where it's not a simple decision of what to do, but really evaluating your environment, understanding that in this journey, without any kind of specific timeline, you need to have a good perspective and grasp on, what is your legacy application infrastructure as you make that journey, what are the transition points you need to make with these solutions. Understanding as you deploy these apps, what are the workloads that's right for the cloud and right for your on-premise solution. And I'm the last to say that not every single workload is for the cloud. Not every single workload is optimized for on-premise. Hence, you do have a choice as hybrid solution as you go through this journey. Many of our customers want to host their websites on the cloud. A lot of our customers says for databases, they like to have the performance, so they want to keep it on-premise. So really depending on your applications, understanding what are the choices you make and what are the pros and cons is very important. As you continue to look at these consolidation, refreshing your aging infrastructure, you also need to look at security, right? Security in terms of what's the right way of consolidating infrastructure for backup, for DR, to make sure these are secure. And I think one of the topics we will be addressing on the next webinar is security and backup, which will be very interesting how we approach that topic in the journey to hybrid cloud. Container, a huge topic that a lot of our customers are looking at, and this will be one of the topics we'll be discussing, especially container optimization. As you choose between VM, container, and Kubernetes, what are the choices and decisions you need to make? Finally, in that whole entire journey, how do you leverage the concept of hybrid cloud, and how do you leverage Azure? Azure is a very powerful platform, and use that as a service in your delivery process. So we hope to take you to the journey and hope to touch upon each of these topics throughout the Virtual Academy of DataON. Clearly, the market is continuing to grow in terms of the sizes. The market for HCI is a $12 billion market and continue to grow on the double-digit exponential rate. Kubernetes as a way to deploy your app and solution versus traditional VM is becoming one of the key decision factors with $8.2 billion market share. Many enterprise customers, our customers, are really considering the hybrid cloud. A hybrid cloud is just not a concept. It's truly a opportunity for you to bridge the benefits of cloud and on-premise to have a hybrid solution. And based on survey, 91% of IT decision makers are really evaluating hybrid cloud. Clearly, the growth of data is incredible with exponential growth on a regular basis. But how do you back it up? How do you make sure there's DR? And that discussion will happen in our future webinar series. And lastly, what type of infrastructure you need to deploy? Is it all in the enterprise? Is it all in your data center? Are these infrastructure optimized for the edge and ROBO? And we believe the solution that we are presenting today with Microsoft and hybrid cloud addresses these challenges you face on a daily basis. As a company and as a way we look at solution, clearly we do believe Microsoft has a platform that allows you to look at all these opportunities, right? Today, Azure is one of the key drivers for the hybrid cloud platform. With the launch of Azure Arc solution and services in Ignite last year, Microsoft really took a huge step forward that says, hey, from a cloud perspective with Azure Arc, you have the ability to manage not just Azure, but you could use multi-cloud environment. Whether or not you want to connect it to Google, AWS, with Azure Arc, you have the ability to have that interface to connect to the cloud on the multi-cloud perspective. But more importantly, using the same interface, you have the ability to manage your on-premise infrastructure, whether or not that infrastructure is Azure Stack HCI in your data center, whether or not that's on the edge with your ROBO of hundreds of sites across the world that you want to see in a single pane of glass. You have the ability to use Azure Arc to see that entire management platform, including ability to look at legacy infrastructure. But all these management does not take us away from the fact that you have to consider data governance, security, backup, remote access, disaster recovery, ability to manage data governance while looking at these model of deployment in a hybrid cloud environment. In our next session, we will absolutely address the data governance piece of it moving forward. One of the key technology clearly that we continue to share with our customer base is Azure Stack HCI. Azure Stack HCI, which many of our previous webinars have discussed, is really a solution that delivers hyper-converged infrastructure that allows you to have the Windows Server OS as a foundational software that delivers Hyper-V, virtualization, software-defined storage to manage your storage and DTP compression, software-defined networking that allows you to use RDMA virtual NICs to manage the entire infrastructure. All that feature and capability are encompassed in the Windows Server licenses, data center license today as a customer. But more importantly, to make it simple, Microsoft also delivered a product called Windows Admin Center, which really is a single pane of glass that allows you to manage that entire infrastructure for your on-premise, but also allows you to connect to the cloud, to leverage all the cloud services. And DataON as a company delivered that complete solution as the partner choice for Microsoft with our extension must, allows you to have that extended view for your infrastructure on-premise. So today's in this discussion, both of our speakers will talk about their perspective of Microsoft Azure Stack from an industry perspective and from a partnership perspective, and really provide an unbiased view of their evaluation of this solution. Azure Stack HCI is not a concept. It's a solution that is mainstream. Why do I say that? Because DataON ourselves have over 650 customer deployments on Windows Server solutions, and you can see these deployments cut across vertical industries, whether or not you're a nonprofit, federal, you're a hosting provider, education, SLID, finance, banking, manufacturing. You can see that there are many customers that have deployed Azure Stack HCI for their primary data center as their hyper-converged infrastructure to consolidate their compute and storage. Also, for their edge, for their remote offices, as Azure Stack HCI. Microsoft itself says there's already 30,000 plus activation of the software-defined storage in Windows Server. So you can see that this solution is really mainstream. Everybody around the world are evaluating the solution and making sure to take advantage of the capabilities and function feature across the board. We also believe is a great solution, and today you'll hear from a StorageReview, Brian, who has done an extensive study on Azure Stack HCI, and without taking his thunder away, he did a clear analysis of what it is, and he believes it's a great solution as well. He'll go through that process. He'll go through his analysis and further in this particular conversation. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alexandra from Intel, who will talk about how Intel really takes technology to enhance the Azure Stack HCI with the Intel capabilities. Go ahead, Alexandra.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you for the introduction. That was pretty cool. And so now I'm here to talk about Intel and Azure Stack HCI, how the two combine, and how we can leverage Intel technology to deliver a Azure Stack HCI solution to whoever you're working with. One thing that I like to people take away is that a HCI solution plays on any vertical. So a lot of people ask me, how do you build an HCI solution for a banking or for health or for government? And the answer is the building blocks are very similar. Obviously, each vertical has different applications and line of business necessities, but the overall hardware and software configuration, it is a building block. And once we understand this building block and how you can leverage Intel technologies plus Microsoft plus your vendor of choice, obviously in this case DataON, we can easily build a solution that will traverse all the verticals. So that's kind of my intake for these. Obviously, I work as a storage solutions architect with Intel, mainly with Optane SSDs. But we will cover the Optane technology as a whole because it plugs into the HCI discussion. Because on the HCI, we have memory, we have storage, and the Optane technology plugs in this gap between storage and memory. And we feel that HCI delivers a great example of how you could use Optane on that. So first and foremost, what are Intel Optane DC SSDs or Datacenter SSDs? Well, basically Optane, right? So Optane, what we call an Optane media, it's a new type of flash. So up to now we had a NAND flash, but with Optane media, it's a different type of compound, a different type of media that Intel and Micron back when then worked together to create. And what Intel brings to the table is that we create all our IP, our software that is tied up with the Optane technology. So we don't only deliver the media, we deliver the technology that leverages the media on the high scale. And for the user, or for whatever solution that uses Optane technology, what can we offer? Obviously, you already listen about the performance, the latency. So yes, we delivered top performance, lower storage latency. But this needs to be coupled with software, the right software to take advantage of it. We deliver quality of service, something that sometimes is not looked at is how can we deliver constant low latency to the application. Regular NAND from time to time can have very big spikes in latency because of the way it works. With Optane SSDs, it's taken away. So we can deliver low latency across the board regardless of the load that we are applying to the SSD. So that's the key benefit that Optane delivers. And also, we have to understand that we are placing Optane in the right place. So we're not only replacing 100% of your storage with Optane. We are taking the best point in your stack in order to take advantage of Optane. So normally what I say, it's a little bit of Optane goes a long way. So if you identify that place, in the case of Azure Stack HCI, on the storage stack, we're talking about our caching layer. If we're talking about the Optane DC persistent memory, we're talking about our memory layer, where we could take advantage of the properties of the medium. So I have talked previously about this. So the big difference between a regular NAND SSD and an Optane SSD is basically the way we interact physically with the media. Regular SSDs, we have reads and writes. We read and write in pages, but every time we have to erase something or modify something, we need to delete that, erase that in blocks. So data is constantly moving physically inside of SSD. And that change in location in the media we call the garbage collection. So we are always moving the firmware, the control is always moving that. But that doesn't happen on an Optane SSD. We don't need to do garbage collection. We don't need to be moving data because we are addressing changes on the bit level. So we can modify every single point of the media independently. So we don't need to query those large chunks or blocks in order to change anything on the data itself. So that's what brings us the low latency and the constant quality of service. So those two things are very important to differentiate between a regular NAND SSD, regardless if it is a TLC or QLC or MLC. Those all have different concentration of data, right? Quad level cells, third level cells. But what we are talking about on Optane is that we don't have that concept of NAND SSD. And also, by not having to rewrite the media constantly, we can offer a high endurance, a much higher endurance than the regular NAND SSDs. But what does that bring to you? Actually, if you think about one of the best places to put Optane SSDs, which is the caching layer on an all-flash scenario is basically a write cache. So there is no read and write cache because normally if you're doing an all-flash scenario, your capacity drives are read intensive. They are read optimized. And reading operation does not affect any endurance and then does not trigger any garbage collection. So in that case, you could have a much lower size of your write cache. Because most HCI solutions, not the Azure Stack HCI, but the other HCI solutions, they have some cap limits on the size of the cache, not because of the performance, but because of endurance. So they normally need to over-provision that cache in order to guarantee that the writes are not going to wear out the drive. But by using Optane, you could actually use much less capacity to that. So the old saying about cache to capacity ratios, they don't apply much when we're using high endurance drives. So the higher the endurance drive, the less cache size you actually would need, to the point that I will only want the size of the cache to absorb the most or the peak write IOs that I have on a per second base, because after a certain period of time, all those cache pages are going to be destaged or copied back to the capacity layer. So you just want to be sure that you have enough free space on the cache to absorb new writes. So basically that relationship goes to a much lower ratio. So that's why that high endurance is comes to play, where you can use much less Optane on a caching layer. So let's talk about how we can optimize with some cost in mind using Optane SSDs and Optane technology in general. So obviously there are some marketing numbers or that we can talk, and Howard already talked about that, but everybody is using HCI. And like I mentioned, HCI goes to any vertical. And if you're listening to this webinar, it's because either you're thinking about using HCI, or even better, you're a consultant, you're an IT pro that delivers HCI solutions. So we want to make sure that you have the best design and design that fits the most of your customers, right? So it's a market that's constantly growing. We are using HCI to replace SAM. We're using HCI to consolidate applications. So there are lots of good things that HCI brings to the table. So what can we use with HCI? So if you follow Microsoft Azure Stack HCI catalog and the whole program, it was launched back on the last Ignite, last November in Orlando. Some of the badgings, or what kind of designs can we offer for branch office, for storage, for high performance, first virtualization, and VDI. So the base architecture will change from workload to workload, solution to solution, but you always have your computing, your networking, your memory and storage. So that will change depending on what you want to emphasize. So if you want to emphasize a high performance SQL server, for instance, you want high performance storage, low latency, high bandwidth, a good number of cores, and you don't want to oversubscribe logical CPU to virtual CPU, so you want to get that ratio very low, 2:1, 4:1, so you don't get on CPU contention that will not use the full storage performance if you're talking about an all-flash solution with Optane. But if you're talking about like a scale-out storage where you're just using the HCI primarily as a storage, you want high capacity. Maybe the low latency is not your primary goal, and you can use low core count because you're not using compute there, you just want the storage capability. So those things are what you need to have in mind in order to change some of your subsystems to match what you need. And the good thing is that Azure Stack HCI with Microsoft, Intel technologies, and their own, we can deliver high performance, low latency, and affordability because we place the right piece, the right hardware at the right place. And the software can take advantage of this. So that's the cool part about this partnership is that we test out those combinations and come up with the design that fits better and attends your needs. So as I mentioned, Optane technology is not only the SSD, but also the persistent memory part. So we launched it also last year, coupled with our latest Xeon second generation, scalable second generation, the Optane DC persistent memory, which can act as a storage or can act as memory extension. That's where it comes what you want to provide to your customers. Coming back to the solution part, if you talk about VDI, where we want the most or the greatest number of sessions per node. So you need cores and you need memory to run those sessions. And you don't need the top memory performance. So you could replace some of your DRAM with DC persistent memory in memory mode to run a VDI HCI solution. So you can save money and have more sessions per node. So keep in mind what are the needs for each one of your customers. The building blocks are the same across all verticals. You just need to emphasize what kind of performance profile you need. So that's the most interesting thing. And we deliver latency, low latency, and high throughput. So that's the greatest thing about Optane is that with Optane technology and the correct place, you can deliver all these without having to fine-tune everything from the file system to the storage. Basically, out of the box, you have that experience. So here I have a basic model how you could fit Optane technology on Azure Stack HCI to achieve certain things. So from left to right, we have what I call option number one, which is increase caching speed. So let's imagine that you have a all-flash scenario, but you have SATA SSDs. So SATA SSDs, you have good enough performance, but you have some bottlenecks on the SATA protocol that you cannot overcome, even though you're using SSDs, which is by definition way better than HDDs, but you want a higher throughput. You want a higher performance out of your storage. So what you can do, you just add an Optane cache layer in front of your SATA SSDs. So in this case, you have lots of options. You can have smaller cluster nodes. So instead of 5 nodes to support your IOPS, you could have 3 nodes to support the same level of IOPS, or even higher, because you have that Optane cache layer. So when I talk about this, is 5 nodes without Optane and 3 nodes with Optane. You would have more performance out of your storage with 3 nodes instead of 5 nodes, because you're overcoming that SATA protocol limitations. And option number 2, something about the VDI, or it's a evolution from option number one. Because with HCI, once you discover a bottleneck and address that, you actually move on to the next bottleneck. So in the same scenario where you add Optane to your SATA SSDs, now you don't have a storage bottleneck, but now you have a memory bottleneck. In the case that if you get less cluster nodes, but you want the same amount of VMs, now you need more memory per node in order to support that VM count, because you will not be oversubscribing your memory, so you need more memory. So in this case, you could use Optane DC persistent memory in memory mode, which will give you a cluster node with a higher memory capacity. Therefore, you can host more VMs per node without changing your storage footprint. So one thing that I always talk to my customers and to whoever is designing a storage part for HCI, and it's an all-flash HCI, it is just start with your usable capacity. Use Optane for your cache, and usable capacity can be your SATA SSDs or low endurance PLC SSDs, and then you'll just be fine. And the third option, now imagine that I'm bandwidth bound. What would that be? So locally, I have a high watermark for bandwidth on SSDs, which is a by 4 PCI Gen 3 design per drive. But I could replace, in this case, my Optane SSDs on the caching layer by Optane DC persistent memory using as a caching platform. In this case, what I'm delivering is a high throughput node where I need a lot of bandwidth for my storage. This is one way to use DC persistent memory for a SQL with high performance. Or if you have, I had a customer that needed a write-read bandwidth. It was like almost 95% of his workload was pure reads. So you build only a 3-node cluster, and with persistent memory and NVMe to deliver the most bandwidth per node. So those are ideas where you have just to identify what is that you need, and make sure that once you deliver and you cover one bottleneck, for sure you're going to discover another bottleneck. And it's going to go on circle. Storage, memory, CPU, network, coming back to storage. So you just need to have a balanced design in this case. So if you need any further information on how to use Optane, that's my email, or you can reach me through Twitter. And that's about it. Some legal disclaimer that we got. So we can move back to Howard and to Brian now. Thank you very much.
All right, guys. Brian Beeler here with StorageReview.com. Howard and team, thanks for having us as part of this adventure with you guys. So we actually, before we get into the whole background, we posted a review which Howard referenced and Microsoft has talked about some back in September of last year around Azure Stack HCI. And the neat thing about it, not to start with the best part and then work backwards, but the neat thing about it is that we had such a great experience with it, and we saw really tremendous performance out of a 4-node cluster, to the point where we said in the review summary at the end that it was the fastest mid-market cluster that we had seen. And part of that is the solution from Intel and DataON from a hardware perspective. Part of it's the software side from from Microsoft. And then there's a little bit of services that DataON puts a nice little wrapper around their solutions to make them easy to deploy. But all of that said, our biggest takeaway is that Azure Stack HCI is way more performant than we thought it was or thought it would be capable of, and may be one of the biggest secrets in the entire HCI world when we think about what else is out there, whether it's Nutanix or vSAN or any of the other dozens of software-defined storage players. Azure Stack HCI was really impressive and really exciting for us. So just to reset the scene into the middle of last year when we started on that review, we had very little knowledge of Azure Stack HCI, and before that it was branded a little bit different around storage spaces. And it was the first time we'd worked with DataON. We had done a little bit of work around Azure Pack a couple of years back, and that was more around bringing the hybrid cloud solution on-prem in large organizations. So entirely different feel at that time than what Stack HCI is about. And we didn't have huge aspirations in terms of performance. We knew that it would offer some performance because it has, and we'll get to it, some good components in it, but we didn't really know what to expect because Microsoft had been and still is a little bit quiet around the capabilities of Azure Stack HCI. So our setup involved 4 of what DataON calls their HCI 224 nodes, and you can see the specs there. So this is prior to Cascade Lake, so this is a little bit older generation at this point, but still nice upper middle CPUs, good RAM footprint. We were using 4 Optane DC P4800X drives for the cache in each node, and then 8, we still use NVMe SSDs for capacity. Now, I do think that Intel brings up a good point. So we were all NVMe on this build, but you really don't have to be. If you wanted to be a little more cost optimized, you could use SATA drives in those other bays. And in fact, we just posted some content about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago about this very issue, that sometimes as technologists at StorageReview, we'd love the whole thing to be filled with Optane top to bottom because we're all about those high-end top numbers. We want to saturate the CPUs. We want to make that Connect X5 NIC punished on the back of these nodes because we're all about what can we do at the max level. But then you've got to back that down sometimes to, okay, well, that's fun, and it's really neat to show the capabilities, but what's the reality of the situation? And the reality is that with just a couple of even these smaller 375 gig Optane drives, you can do a whole lot of work if you understand workload sizing. So that's another part of it that DataON can help you with, but understanding what that cache need is, filling that with the high-performance products. If you're going to spend your money, spend it there. And then if you've got budget to keep that capacity tier high-performant, great. But if not, going to SATA is not going to kill you on these things. Anyway, we won't have to devolve too much into that technology conversation. But this also ships with a domain controller and then 2 Mellanox switches. One of the other things that's really neat about what we got from DataON, and we've got it in our review, is that they also send a wiring diagram that talks through all the node interconnects. Every single wire is color-coded, and it shows you, this green wire goes from, node 4 to the switch and here and there. And, while that's not earth-shattering on its face, it makes it really easy for us to stand up this cluster without having to engage professional services. So, Howard will gladly go to your location and help you plug the thing in if you want, but you don't have to do that in many cases. And this is like I said, a 4-node with domain controller and 2 switches, so, relatively decent-sized cluster. If you went with something smaller, like a 2-node or some of the switchless configurations that DataON offers, it gets even simpler. So, like I said, we're performance-centric, and so we ran this thing through a number of our regular benchmarks, and I'll just hit some of these highlights. So to be clear, we ran in two-way and three-way mirrors, so that really speaks to more about data availability. What do you want from a resiliency standpoint? And there's clearly a trade-off in performance there. We actually were running in two-way initially, and Microsoft said, that's really great, and that shows you the best numbers, but could you run another batch of data on three-way to show what a more resilient cluster would look like? Sure, which is also somewhat unusual. Most of the guys we work with are all about those hero numbers. So anyway, 4K random read, we peaked over 2.2 million IOPS and still are talking really great latency there in both two and three-way. If we look at some larger block sizes, sequential, 64K sequential, we're talking about almost 40 gigabytes per second and 46 in three-way. Just from a pure bandwidth standpoint, it's the highest then. That was in September of last year, and remains, I believe it remains still the highest we've seen. Just really impressive. Again, most orgs aren't going to need this. What we're trying to show is what this system is capable of, and it's capable of quite a lot. As we look on at the SQL Server testing from a throughput perspective, about 2 million IOPS and really low latency. So again, we're seeing really good system performance. And what we see a lot of times of these database workloads is not that we get more transactional performance out of them. So if we swapped out, for new CPUs, we might get a few more TPS or transactions per second. But what we're really focused on with SQL Server in this case is the latency or the time it takes to deliver those transactions. So that's really important, and we saw fantastic numbers here. So another thing that's important with these clusters is management. We went through DataON's WAC integration, the Windows Admin Center. Works, everything lays out really nice. Now, a lot of this is on Microsoft, but DataON also uses some of their own tools this one's called Must that they have that give additional visibility and management into the cluster health, capabilities, everything that's going on there. And in fact, we worked with DataON on another project where we connected an Azure Stack HCI cluster to Azure and set up site recovery. So everything is done within this interface and is pretty familiar once you get into it. So back on our key findings, again, we saw really great performance from both two-way and three-way mirror. Used with those Optane SSDs in the front end, the NVMe for the regular Intel NVMe drives for the capacity tier. And we don't even have, like I said, the highest end gear in, which hopefully we'll resolve that with Howard and Intel shortly. But when you start thinking about what you can do with persistent memory, with the new NICs, so Mellanox has got 200 gig NICs out now that weren't available when we did this work last year. There's all sorts of upside capabilities here with the larger capacity Optane SSDs, the persistent memory, the Cascade Lake CPUs. So everything that we saw, just think about it now as being able to be bigger. So we did have a nice back-end Fabric 2 in our testing, and we saw generally low latency performance throughout. So in the event that you definitely check out StorageReview.com or search Google for Azure Stack HCI review, and you'll find the work we did. But feel free to reach out. Kevin runs our test lab, and I run the main org here. But we'd be happy to talk or chat with you or answer your questions here, of course, as well on anything else there. But we're excited about the path DataON is on. We're really excited to see the capabilities of the new Intel parts that have been launched since we did this initial review last year. And yeah, there's a great story here, ranging all the way from edge with 2-node all the way up to data center core with all the Azure connectivity to the cloud. There's a tremendous amount of flexibility here. And if you have any concern about performance, we found it to be extremely capable. So we're really happy with what we've seen, and we'll turn it back over to Howard and see what else we have to learn from him.
Hey, thanks, Brian. And yes, if any customer needs an on-site deployment, happy to go out there and help you deploy those solutions. And more we're getting a professional service. We didn't need to do that for Brian because he's much capable of doing all his work. Brian, I think, for me, is really, I really appreciate the fact is a third party looking at a solution. And when you have your own data, when you present to your customer, the customer thinks it's great, but still it's your optimization. But having a unbiased third party to look at the solution and look at the number as a way to speak to it, to me is very important, because a lot of people want to make sure they can evaluate the right solution for their workload. And thank you for doing the test was great, and the data really shows that your capability as well. And yes, there'll be more new toys for you this year for you to evaluate, and we look forward to continue our partnership for you to show your audience new technology that's in the marketplace. Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, great.
For me, the key is wrapping it up, right? I don't want to go into the detail of we will have multiple sessions about solutions. The goal today was really to show you that, hey, Azure Stack HCI solution, it's really a mainstream technology, and Brian said it's one of the best kept secrets still, believe it or not, because you have that solution today. If today you own a Windows Server data center license 2016, 2019, you already have the software and the code that support a Azure Stack HCI. All you have to do is architect the right solution, and you could deploy it by running the Windows Server 19 software on it. Then you have a hyper-converged infrastructure that allows you to do NVMe cache, to have dedupe compression, to have multiple data sets for security, all that feature capabilities available. And we have taken customers throughout that journey, in the last 3 years. Whether or not the customer started with the original storage spaces in 2012, and they moved to 2016 with WSSD, which is what it's called before. Then as they migrate that to Windows Server 16 to 19, where you have additional feature such as dedupe compression, nested resiliency, or today, where customers really embracing the concept of Azure Stack HCI on-premise, ability to have that hybrid services connected Azure. We've been helping customers throughout this journey to make sure that the solution we deliver, the design that we help architect is right for their workload. And really, there isn't a single size fits all, right? But it is a single software solution that helps you address different type of application that you need to run your business. And our goal is to help you go through that journey, the hybrid cloud journey, and make sure that you guys have all the information and content you need to go through that journey. As a wrap up, I think that it's important to know that, hey, DataON continue to invest our resources in Microsoft. We're an exclusive shop. We've been around for 30 years. We're a huge Intel partner, Microsoft partner. Intel Select solution is one of the key solutions for us to validate, to make sure everything is validated and certified in that process. We continue to add value in terms of our own software to continue to help our customer to manage, to monitor, to deploy their solution and the solution they choose on Microsoft Azure Stack HCI, and we're going to extend that value. But more importantly, is really getting more recognition across the board that Microsoft is a real market leader in hyper-converged infrastructure, and we hope our audience and customer continue to evaluate the solution. If you have any questions, reach out to us and reach out to our partners, reach out to Intel to make sure you can get all the information you need in that whole entire process. In summary, I think for me, it's making sure that you guys continue to follow the solution. We will have multiple virtual academy sessions We'll go in depth on some of the design criteria. As a preface, as a preview, the next session we'll have is going to be focused on backup DR business continuity, and we'll have a partner, Veeam, and also our partner to come out and talk about some of the implementation we've done as a hybrid cloud solution for data governance, and continue that entire trend of making sure you understand the journey of hybrid cloud and what are the key areas you need to focus on. Alexandro and Brian, any feedback to the audience? Any last-minute highlights you'd like to tell the audience?
Well, this is Brian. I mean, I just think that the capabilities that the systems can offer, like I said, ranging from edge to core, is important, especially when you consider the attach of what you can do in Azure in the cloud. And there's some really simple things that you can do, like site recovery, which we did with you guys and worked really well. You know, not everything has to be big and fast like we like all the time. There's a lot of stuff in between. And the scalability of the nodes that you offer, some of the dense nodes, some of the more standard 2U nodes. I mean, there's just a lot there, right, all the way down to a little 2-node switchless at the edge. And just because the need is small doesn't mean you still have to compromise on features or capabilities or go with some cobbled together solution to hit a price point. There's a lot out there, and I would just encourage the audience at large to consider not to pitch for you, but the fact is you guys have a big breadth of solutions for Azure Stack HCI, and don't let the opportunity slip to look at these clusters and nodes, even for something that's small. So as much as the excitement is there around the Intel hardware and the capabilities of these clusters at a real high performance level, that's great, but it slides all the way down the scale as well. So that would be my one leave behind.
Good feedback. Thank you. Alexandro?
Sure. I think I'll go with the same answer. And also on the Optane technology, since we have this range of sizing that you'll be able to see that you can use Optane to leverage whatever size you need, and it will grow with you. So that's the good part. You can scale up your needs as well. So it will defer that additional node that you think you may need, just because you may not have the correct storage and CPU for that. So that use of technologies is very important. Get to the sizing right with some spare capacity and spare performance, so you can deal with some spikes on your workload.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Keep using SSDs.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Alexandro, for presenting to our audience, and looking forward to future engagement. And that ends our presentation. And thank you, and have a great day and a safe day. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Howard.